Well, welcome to designing and operating accessible nature trails. And we're going to introduce ourselves and then we'll get started. I'm Lucille Gertz. I work at MLTC Audubon's Education Department, directing adult education and accessibility statewide.
And I'm Liz Stetson. I'm our Senior Director of Capital Assets and Planning. So I manage our capital projects across the state, including construction and design of our all-persons trails.
And hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Hutchinson. I also work at Mass Audubon, and I am the Director of Sanctuary Stewardship, which has a lot of things in its preview, but basically making sure that people can come out and come to our sanctuaries, and they are accessible, and providing the tools and resources needed in order to manage those sanctuaries successfully.
Are your microphones on?
They are not.
This is the microphone.
Yep. When we do our presentation, we'll be sitting at the microphone, so you'll hear us fine. Thank you.
Okay, I can hear that it's on. Great. Well, I get started, and we want to just get a sense from the room of your familiarity and experience with accessible nature trails. So just with a hands up, how many of you are here to just now be introduced to all-persons trails or accessible nature trails? Anyone? Okay, great. How many of you have visited an accessible nature trail? Oh, look at that. Okay, great. How many of you have done trainings or been to a presentation on accessible trails? Okay. And then are any of you likely to be planning a trail, or are you actively planning a trail? Okay, I'm going to add one more question. Have any of you actually planned and constructed a trail yourself or with partners? Okay, great. So lots of experience. That's what we like. Feel free to add to what we're saying with the experiences that you've had. So our all-persons trails at Mass Audubon are part of what we call our MAPLE universe, and it's our Mass Audubon accessible programs and learning experiences. The trails are a very famous, public, well-known part of this work, but I just want to give you a quick preview. The physical infrastructure of accessibility allows us to offer adaptive activities and educational programs. We have an inclusive customer service philosophy that anyone can come to our sites and have an experience that's accessible to them. There's a lot of partnership and collaboration involved in this work. The trails and our other accessible amenities give us opportunities to meaningfully engage people, such as interns or volunteers, and I'll talk about that really in a moment. And then we have just committed ourselves to developing and operating as many universally designed features and experiences as possible. Those include gardens and wildlife viewing boardwalks and the trails themselves. So, here are some of the programs and events we're able to do because of the accessible features, especially the all-persons trails. We run public programs and we describe them as accessible and universally designed. We run events. We have times where our sites are quiet and closed to the public. We call those sensory days, and people can come in who need it quieter, who have sensory concerns. And then group programs come to us all the time: assisted living, independent living agencies, senior centers, council on aging, disability commissions often bring van loads of guests to have experiences on our all-persons trails. We're really happy to welcome them. And largely, they're also set up for any visitor in any party configuration, intergenerational party, group of friends, an individual, couple of people, to just have a self-guided learning experience on the trail. They might be there for fitness, they might be there for socializing, but we have an educational component if they would like to take the self-guided interpretive tour. And finally, we're really committed to this meaningful long-term engagement. So we have young adults and teenagers who help maintain our accessible features and set up some of our universally designed events. These are vocational transitional students age 16 to 22, and before they age out of public service, school district services, they need some vocational employment experiences. So we have about 40 of those students who work around the state. They come once or twice a week. They work with our staff, our property staff, our education staff, and they learn all about conservation and accessibility. And we also welcome groups that need accommodations, that want to do some volunteering. We call that our inclusive volunteering. And then just lots of in-depth education. So the trails allow all this to happen, and the trails are part of this network. Here's what the whole network looks like. In our nature centers, most of our all-person trails are at nature centers. They're not all, but those that are at nature centers, we make sure the entrances, admission areas, restrooms, everything's ADA accessible to the extent possible. We've been working on this for decades. We have boardwalks, overlooks, wildlife viewing. Every picnic table we install now, we lay out as an ADA-style picnic table, so you don't have to climb over anything to use the table, and people using mobility devices can come in on the edges. So it's just being thoughtful and intentional about everything we're trying to do, from our nature play areas to our specialized garden pathways, and the seating areas that we set up. I'll show you those in a moment. So the all-persons trails are sort of the main star of all of this, but they're really just they're not the only thing. But on the all-persons trails, I'm going to give you a 5-minute tour of the all-persons trails. We have a dedicated standard approach to signage. We do large print raised lettering signage and braille. This sign shows us a phone number. We're actually removing those. We're transitioning off the cell phone service because visitors have so many other ways to access the audio tours now. But 10 years ago, the cell phone tour was like the way to do it. But we use so raised lettering and braille on the signage. We use icons when we can for people who aren't necessarily English speakers, although our diversity advisors tell us if we do English and Spanish, which we try to do on most of our sanctuary standard signage, we're covering 90% of the language users in Massachusetts. So that's a commitment we've made to certain areas of our signage. But wherever possible, we use icons instead. So picnic table, in some cases, it's a picnic table with a little arrow. So you just go through that grove of trees and you get to the picnic area. So whatever you can do to just remove barriers is what we try to do on the signage. And the braille is, we've learned how to do braille. We know which sign fabricators know how to do braille. And so this is just a sampling of the kind of signage. It's either the name of the stop on an all-persons trail or the feature that's put along. We have tactile features. You'll see a slide in a moment. So we also just label the features that way. The trails have an array of physical supports that provide people with navigation cues. So some of them have post and rope guiding systems. About half of our 19 trails have a post and rope guiding system. We can't always install that. It doesn't always work, but we know it's the gold standard. So we try, and that would allow someone from the beginning of the trail to the end, whether it's a half a mile or 2/3 of a mile, it would allow them to independently navigate it if they're a blind or low vision visitor. So the navigation supports are important. When it can't be a post and rope guided system, sometimes we use curbing, or we describe the surfacing that's changing, or some sort of edging. So we can sometimes provide some of that support without a post and rope. The multi-use seating I mentioned, can't really see it as well as I thought in this slide, but what that means is that when you have a structure for seating, a bench or a log or a rock or something that is a seating area, next to the seating area, you have another 5 feet of cleared space of prepared surface, so that someone pushing a stroller, using a walker, using a wheelchair can use the seating area without getting rolled into the poison ivy or the vegetation or falling down a hill or hitting a rock. So we commit to trying to have those accessible multi-use seating areas wherever we can. One of our accessibility consultants has given us the guidelines that the ideal is every 500 feet on one of these trails. We should have a multi-use seating area. We try to average that. I mentioned the picnic tables already. And the last thing I want to talk about the post and rope guiding system is we have followed the standard that we were introduced to visiting a few accessible trails around the country 15 years ago. We've kind of updated it ourselves, and we have settled on the bead system. So we use a round bead to indicate a stop marker is within arm's reach, and a square bead indicates that seating is nearby. And if someone's using the trail materials, following the self-guided tour, it tells them how to find the seating. It might be across from the bead. It might be around the bend. One of the most exciting things about the self-guided tours and the all-persons trails are the tactile displays and features. These are so popular for all the visitors. Kids love these things. Can't get enough. We're putting more. The newer trails have like 12 of these on them, where the early trails, we had like 1 or 2. They're just growing. Our colleagues who install these things have come up with all sorts of ingenious ways to design these structures. They can be as simple as the butterfly life cycle model on the left. That thing cost us $5. It's been up for 15 years. It hasn't even faded. We bought it from the nature company, and a very talented volunteer or property colleague attached it to a piece of roofing material. That thing's been up forever. That's our favorite example. But in the bottom center, you'll see that most recently at our All Persons Trail in Mid-Cape, our colleague made this wonderful display of the types of animals using that wetland or seen crossing that boardwalk over the wetland. So sometimes we put natural objects in the way of people, like tree bark might be within reach, and we just invite people to explore the different types of tree bark. Sometimes we bring the bark to the station, like the picture in the lower left. And if the town, all of our nature centers have green features, sustainable energy features. And if the town allows, we invite people to come up and engage with the solar panels. And some towns we can't, some we can. So that has become integrated into the All Persons Trails as well. The way we design our All Persons Trails is that we offer a whole suite of materials to the visitors. They can access them online. They can borrow them when they show up. If it's an unstaffed nature center, if there's not a staffed nature center, people can get most of these things online. So the tour booklets, and I have samples on the table if anyone wants to look at them later or whatever, is we print them in what we call regular print, which is pre-designed, and we just have a stack of them ready for people to borrow. We can also print them in large print. We also put the booklets online in a Word doc, and so someone with low vision can print it in the font, style, size, and color combination that's most readable to them. And we have them printed in Braille by the Perkins Library. They print all our Braille for us, and we put the tour booklets online. So the key to this is make everything in as many formats as possible, we have found, and make them available in as many places. We have two styles of trail maps. We have a printed trail map that's on the sign and on a welcome sign and online. And then we have a tactile trail map that we create for each of the trails. Again, and there's an example up here if you want to look at it on your way out. The same tour gets put in an audio format, which people have a really strong interest in using. People of all abilities, people with all learning styles. Some people just really like the audio tours. So they're available online, and I've been told people with disabilities who are concerned about about the accommodations they might need or the comfort they might have often listen to the audio tour before their visit, so they know what to expect. And they might download it into their own audio player or device. And if they don't, we have one that's available for loan, or they can access it at some of our sites still through cell phone. And then we have things to loan out, like audio players, all the printed materials, mobility equipment. We have a dozen all-terrain walkers that people can trade their indoor walker or their pavement walker for. We have about 10 grit freedom chairs now located around the state. We have seat canes and trekking poles. We have hands-free binoculars, large print field guides. We have this whole array of things that we have available for loan. And most of the centers will have just a list of what's available. We have found it's really important to train the customer service staff, that people who are greeting visitors or talking on the phone or answering an inquiry about the trails, it's very important that they're up on ADA standards, language, etiquette, regulations. We don't want someone showing up with a service animal and then being turned away when in fact they have a legal right to be there by federal mandate. But we do want the customer service staff or volunteer member to know what they can ask and how to help that visitor have a great experience and how to protect everyone else involved, wildlife, domestic animals, other visitors. And we have been asked and tasked with many times with helping other organizations learn what we've learned, because we're a little farther along in this work, and some organizations are just getting started. So Stephen, Liz, and I often field requests for information from other organizations. And it got to the point after we did 10 of these trails, we were funded by a planning grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services, one of the groups that just recently got eliminated, to share this work and this knowledge with other organizations. And so this manual, Mass Audubon's All Persons Trails, it is about 10 years old. Some of this material is out of date, but it's still available online. I have a copy up here and it's available online. Part of the grant was to make this free to any organization that wanted to learn how to do this. So moving on, the All Persons Trail, we call them APTs, All Persons Trails. The components that really make these trails work are the way they're designed for as many users as possible, training the staff, as I said, making the information relevant to transportation. This is really, in the 15 years I've been doing this, this has actually gotten a lot easier because many of our visitors take Ubers and Lyfts to get to our trails. That wasn't the case. 15 years ago, we had to look at how close to public transportation or paratransit these trails were. So that's almost become not an issue at all. It's still a cost issue, but there are a lot more opportunities now and options. Again, having the trail materials, the information in multiple formats has been really helpful to our audience, to the people using these trails, that the information is available in advance of their visit. For some, it's very, very important for some visitors. There's a lot of outreach and collaboration with partners, the local disability office, local assisted living. Yesterday, I was with a bunch of testers from the Bay State Council for the Blind who are helping us with some new signage standards and what would be helpful for low vision or people who are blind. So this work really isn't ever done in a vacuum. It's always done with users in mind, with testers, getting visitor feedback. And then there's an expectation, and those of you who've worked on these trails, I'm sure have also realized this expectation. We share with each other very freely, very comfortably. We all want more accessible trails around. And so we're happy to share that information. Finishing up, the inclusive customer service, this has been really important, that if you are going to operate and offer accessible nature trails, the people talking about these trails really need to be up on ADA, as I said earlier, provide really accurate information. So here's an example. If someone calls and says, I'm interested in visiting the nature trail, my companion uses a wheelchair. We want to come on Saturday. I want to make sure the person who's answering the phone doesn't give any opinion at that point. Just says, okay, the trail's a half a mile long. This is how it's surfaced. These are the features along the trail, and not, oh, that could be really difficult. No, we don't want we want to just give the physical information, let the visitor and the inquirer ask the questions they need to ask. But it's really important that people are trained in what's appropriate to give out for information and what's not. And finally, I understand there's always a question about how do we get this work done? It's a lot of work, takes a lot of time. Liz is going to get into how much time and work it actually takes to develop one of these trails from start to finish. But this is an example of all the people involved. So internally in our organization, every location that has an all-persons trail has a site team, property staff, educators, visitor services staff who help create the trail. We have volunteers who are just incredibly valuable to us. We have to have planning with our capital projects colleagues on permitting, construction, costs. Our development colleagues raise money for these trails. They are not inexpensive. Our organization has a statewide accessibility team, and we are the statewide all-persons trail team, the three of us. So we're involved in every trail. And just how we share that, every region right now, we're currently divided into 9 regions. Every region has at least one staff who's the designated accessibility specialist. So, and our marketing colleagues know how to speak about this work and share these stories. So this is just a lot of internal collaboration, but that is equally matched with all the external collaboration that's needed. And so we have 2 accessibility consultants who work with us year-round. One has worked with us for 15 years. One is a little newer to the project. They help us develop every one of these trails. They give us input on the route, on the features, on the seating, on the interpretation. We have community resource professionals and partners, again, like the head of the local disability commission or the independent living agency. Every trail is developed with the input of expert users, people who need the accommodations, who come test things out, let us know if something needs to be improved or tweaked or maintained. We have, obviously, there's some fundraising and funders and donors involved. Liz will get into this, but we have to hire trail design construction crews to get a lot of this work done. I have to make sure as we're working on the materials that the printers and sign fabricators actually know how to do Braille. For example, that's one thing a sign vendor might say, oh, I've never done Braille, but I'll try it. Yeah, no, thank you. It's very tricky. We're very lucky because nearby in Watertown, Mass, not too far from where I'm based in Lincoln, is the Perkins Library. And they happen to be the national leaders on standards for Braille. They test all our Braille, they give us advice, they proof everything. So we're very lucky, but I will just give you all a heads up. If the sign maker says they want to try Braille, go to somewhere else. Because it comes with a lot of typos and a lot of the style, and it's a little tricky. But some of you probably already know that. And then there's just the accessibility community of practice, people doing this work. There are a lot of networks. The Mass Cultural Council has a whole accessibility arm. I'm part of that network where organizations become member organizations because you're truly committed to making your museum, your setting, your botanic garden or zoo more accessible. And we just all work together and share resources and make it happen. So I'm sure there were questions about that, which you can save to the end. And I think at this point I hand it over to you, Liz.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. That was great. I'm going to share a little bit more, as Lucy mentioned, about kind of the process for creating these trails from design through fundraising and construction, and then just share a few examples of our most recently completed trails. To give you a little bit of context to that work, so right now we are up to 19 all-persons trails across the state. The first one was at our Stony Brook Wildlife Sanctuary in Norfolk, built in 2008. And Lucy has, the expertise and experience of all these trails that have come since. And our most recent ones, the last few here have just opened in the last couple years. Our list keeps getting updated more quickly than we can keep the map up to date. So we're working on that. But our ultimate goal is to have 25 accessible all-persons trails by the end of 2026. And with that, we're trying to have one of these trails at every one of our staffed nature centers. So anywhere that we have a building with a nature center, we also have an accessible outdoor experience. So that's what we're working towards right now. Our process is typically a 2-year process, and at a very high level, it's sort of a year for planning, design, fundraising, and then a year or sort of construction season of actually building the trail. And our planning process typically starts with a site visit to our properties. These trails are all constructed with, as Lucy, kind of alluded to at the end there, lots of input from many of departments in our organization. So we typically start with a site visit to the property that would include education staff who might have perspectives on unique kind of interpretive educational opportunities that we would want to be sure to hit along a trail. We would include our conservation and science colleagues who have a perspective on particular areas of habitat that we want to preserve and not disrupt with a trail, or unique kind of natural features that we do want to highlight on a trail. So we have, bring a whole crew to the site, walk a potential trail route, kind of make some modifications through that conversation about different, elements, places that we want to highlight, and then start, kind of putting that on paper, mapping the trail. And there's typically kind of a few rounds of that as we refine the overall trail layout. And through that process, we're also checking the slopes, making sure that we're, placing the trail in a way that will meet the U.S. Forest Service trail accessibility guidelines. Those are the parameters that we design to. So we're kind of checking that slope as we plan, and also considering things like erosion and long-term maintenance of the trail is all kind of part of that planning process. Usually kind of midway through this point, we will reach out to potential contractors if it's a trail that requires contractor assistance, either a professional trail building crew or a lot of times, we may want to feature a wetland that would require boardwalk construction. So we start reaching out to contractors to get some initial estimates on what kind of cost we might be looking at. And then that's usually kind of a back and forth. And when I show some examples of specific trails, I'll kind of show what that looks like. But once we start to have those estimates, it's the process of kind of going back to some of those initial ideas, right-sizing the scope of the project for our potential budget. Many of these trails involve permitting, particularly if there's wetlands involved. That's really the key piece of permitting that we might do on these trails, or if there's natural heritage habitat that we're interacting with. So after we kind of have a fairly firm plan and have some design documents, we would begin that permitting process. In parallel with all of this, our development team is working on fundraising, and I think we have one of them in the audience here today. So if folks have specific questions for her, but the fundraising process really can continue on kind of through the whole planning process and often even through the end of the construction process. So that's sort of year one. Year two, we're doing construction, and we try to do either typically spring or fall construction. Our sanctuaries with summer camps are very, very busy places in the summer, so we tend to not work during that season if we can avoid it. And as the planning and construction is going along, again, kind of in parallel with that, our education staff is working on the interpretive overlay, all the elements that Lucy shared. So that is really a big lift to write the content of those tours, start building, those physical interpretive elements. So that really goes on through the entire 2-year period. And then sometimes, it gets installed typically at the very end of the project when the trail itself is constructed. And then we have an opening and a ribbon cutting, and it's very exciting and wonderful, and lots of enthusiasm about them. And then ongoing maintenance from that point forward. So in terms of budget, I think, and it sounds like there's a lot of folks in the audience who have experience with this, so this may not be new information, but there are a number of costs beyond, obviously, just the trail construction itself. And some things to keep in mind as you're planning include, as I said, particularly if you're dealing with wetlands, wetland delineation, surveying, if you need to submit a notice of intent with your local conservation commission, that sometimes requires engaging a civil engineer or other design consultants to put those documents together. Then there's the trail construction itself. We have done a number of trails recently with the Appalachian Mountain Club's professional trail building crew, have been a fantastic partner for us, and they typically, relocate for an entire trail season to wherever they're building a trail. So in addition to the trail construction, there's sort of lodging and other costs associated with that. Any sort of physical built elements like boardwalks, bird blinds, those obviously are an additional cost. And then there's elements beyond the trail itself that contribute to kind of the overall experience, like accessible parking. You want to make sure that somebody can easily arrive and actually get out on the trail. Landscape improvements, often, we may be disturbing an area, and this kind of presents an opportunity to address invasive species or enhance habitat. And those are great things that we try to kind of roll into these projects when we can. And then the interpretive educational elements as well. And then the last thing is sort of an additional cost on top to consider, accounting for your own staff time. As we've said, these can be very time-consuming projects, require a lot of staff time. Contingency, particularly if you're early in the planning process, things can evolve, and it's always great to have a little buffer. And then we more recently have started including a maintenance endowment on our trails. The trails do require, we are doing gravel surface trails, which require regular maintenance. And, we want to ensure that anybody who arrives to use an accessible trail has a good experience. The surface is well maintained, easy to use. And particularly for trails that have built elements like boardwalks, those also, require a fair amount of maintenance. So we try to build that into our budget early on. Some sources of funding that we have used, it's really kind of a spectrum of funding. The Mass Trails Grant, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is an annual grant cycle that has been a great partner to us and a supporter of many of the projects that were on the previous list. Local community foundations are a great resource. And then we've listed here a number of public and private foundations, all of which have kind of different areas of focus. Some of them are really interested in the educational, interpretive piece. Some will support, actual capital and the construction of the trail. So they all kind of have different areas of focus. And then corporate funders and individual private donors are another kind of potential source of support. So I'm just going to quickly kind of give you a little tour through some of our most recently completed projects. This one is Brewster's Woods in Concord, Mass. Was completed towards the end of 2023 and opened in spring of last year. This is a little over a 100-acre property. The trail is about 0.6 out, so it's an out and back trail, so 1.2 miles total. And one of the things that we really think about and look a lot at when we're laying out these trail routes is how we can give people a really diverse experience and have them experience, a variety of habitats along the trail. And this one, I think, was really successful in that you get kind of a woodland experience, you come out into an open meadow, and then it brings you all the way down to the edge of the Concord River. This is a property where we did less of the interpretive elements, and I think it's important to note that we kind of customize these trails depending on the site. And this property, we're trying to have kind of a lighter touch. There's not a nature center here now. It's a little bit more of a kind of low intervention place, and so we did not do the post and rope guide. There is a tour, there's signage, but it's a little bit of a lighter load on the educational and interpretive elements. Here's just a few photos of what that. From our opening last spring. This next one, number 18, is in Long Pasture Wildlife Sanctuary in Barnstable on the Cape. And this is sort of the other end of the spectrum as far as educational interpretive elements. They were really excited about having kind of how many did we end up with? 12 of those tactile elements. So they got really into it and created all kinds of beautiful things. But I included this plan just to show a little bit of what our planning process looks like. This was early on when we were considering a number of different loop routes, and we had each of those different colored segments priced separately so that we could then say, okay, depending on our fundraising, we can either do the full thing, or maybe we only do one loop now and come back and do a second loop at a later date. So kind of structuring our planning process with potential phasing in mind really gives you kind of flexibility as you move forward. Ultimately, we ended up eliminating the green section here, but this trail now includes all the red, blue, and yellow sections that you see on the map. And again, you get, views to the bay, woodland, and a pond experience as well. And this was one that we worked with Appalachian Mountain Club Trails crew on constructing that trail as well. And there's some boardwalk features and ponding platform that were part of this project as well. And then 19 is Pawtucket Farm is in Lowell. This is a former Christmas tree property, you may be able to tell. It's another site right now that we don't have a nature sanctuary there yet, or a nature center there yet. So right now it's really just the trail surface, but our hope is that, we'll be adding some of those more educational interpretive elements as this property develops. This is a newly acquired property, and so our first step was to really get this trail built and have it be open and accessible to the public, and it's been getting a lot of great use there. Another image of that photo. And then lastly, our most recent one, which is still in progress, this is Oak Knoll in Attleboro. And this is a trail where we, again, kind of thought about phasing early in the planning process. And what's shown on this map is sort of the long-term vision to do this lollipop loop trail. But in the short term, we did a shorter section and then a boardwalk and platform out to the pond. So that really, in a very short distance, gives somebody an accessible experience. They have a wonderful view of the pond. It's a great place to do programming, accessible programming. So just with kind of a small intervention, we were really able to change the way that people can access this property. And then down the road, we'll hopefully come back and do that longer loop trail as a second phase. Or images of what that looks like. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to talk a little bit about trail maintenance.
Thank you, Liz. So we got through the planning and finding funding and actually building the trail, but guess what? Now you have to maintain it. And that's a piece that is often forgot. And I'm really glad that Liz mentioned that as you're raising funds for these trails, raising funds for an endowment to continue to maintain that trail into the future is a really important and great step that your organization should really take. But maintaining these trails and keeping them up to date, there are challenges that your organization needs to be willing to face. So at Mass Audubon, there were a very large statewide organization with about 50 property staff across the state. Staff availability and knowledge of how to maintain these trails is limited. You need staff to help with the planning, help with the permitting, help with the construction. And we are looking at ways that we can enhance the knowledge base of our staff at Mass Audubon so we can do as much of this work from start to finish and maintaining in-house. Those long-term and short-term maintenance needs are something that you really need to stay on top of. At Mass Audubon, we manage about 210 miles of trails. About 7.5% of those trails are what we consider all-persons trails. A large amount of our staff time maintaining trails is focused on that 7.5%. All-persons trails, you have users coming to use those trails that their expectations need to be met. If you have somebody hiking on a trail and there's a tree down or there's a washout, a lot of users that are going for that type of experience, they can work around that needed trail maintenance. Some individuals coming to use our all-persons trails can't have those barriers there. You need to meet those expectations and be on top of it. So availability of partners, Liz talked about partnering with AMC. They're a wonderful organization to partner with. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but and then also fundraising. These are not inexpensive trails to make. Ongoing maintenance needs, there are many. Here are some of the highlights that you really need to be on top of. Resurfacing, making sure that that surfacing meets your standards and requirements. Weeding with the type of surfaces that we often use. Weeds will come in. You need to maintain those edges. You will constantly need to battle water and erosion control. So you try to build to minimize that, but it is something that you will need to face. And then repairs to the tactile elements that Lucy talked about, as well as the rope guides that we have on many of the trails. Though you wouldn't think it, kids for some reason like to swing on those ropes and hang on them. And and bump into them, so you need to make sure that you're keeping an eye on those. And then, of course, updating the audio tour as as things change, and you want to highlight different aspects along the trail. So yes, we go in and we build these trails and we have people use them, but we're constantly evaluating them. They can constantly get better. So one of the things that we do at Mass Audubon is we go back and we bring our partners, we bring user groups out, and we have them go on our trails, and we ask them, what could make it better? How could we change it? Here's a picture of a trail at Allen's Pond, right at the Cape, and you can see we added the rope and post, which really added to the experience there. Also at Allen's Pond, we had an area that overlooks this wetland, and it is often used by school groups, by our educators for different natural history classes that they do, and we really wanted everyone to be able to come out and enjoy it. So having the rope and post actually go out and circle around this platform, still allowing kids to get down on their knees and do the dip netting and look what's going on in the pond, but allowing everybody to get out there and sit there. And I don't have to tell you, we live in New England. You sit quietly in a wetland area and those spring peepers start to call, those wood frogs start to call. It's magical. And we wanted to make sure that everybody could enjoy that. And you can see one of the tactile displays that we have at this site as well. So as you're maintaining these trails, things are going to come up, and you're going to have to determine how you're going to tackle those maintenance needs. So at Mass Audubon, as we see issues come up with our trails, we go out and we have a trails team that goes out and we assess the maintenance needs of those trails. And when we do that, those are very, got to get back to the mic. Those are very detailed. And if you're interested, I have one of our plans that we put together here. About every 50 feet of the trail, we have what we want to do to upgrade it, maintain it, and make sure that it's meeting the standards that we have. So it's very detailed work to make sure that we're meeting all of those standards. You develop the plan for maintenance, and then you have to determine how much it's going to cost. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Do you have the equipment? Are you going to rent the equipment? Are you going to be able to do it in-house with your staff or volunteers? Or are you going to have to hire outside help to do that work? So it's variable, but it's something that you are going to continue to need to do. At Mass Audubon, we have our staff going out at a minimum of a monthly basis, walking these trails, looking at them, making sure they're meeting our standards. After heavy rains or other weather impacts, we go out and we make sure we check them, usually within 24 hours in case something significant has happened. But you have to have that constant oversight because, again, it is so important to meet your users' expectations. One of our first all-persons trail that we had at Mass Audubon is at Stony Brook in Norfolk. And we had a problem. We had beavers there. And the beavers do what beavers do. They started building more and more dams. And as they did that, we had a lot of flooding along our all-persons trail. And it became an issue. And as we were looking how we were going to address this to make sure that the trail met the expectations of our users and our guidelines, we needed to make sure that we communicated that to the public. This is really important. I've said it a few times now, but you do not want somebody to come out expecting an experience on an all-persons trail that they don't get to have. So you need to make sure your front staff know that this trail isn't meeting those current conditions for whatever reasons. We put it on our website, we put it on our voicemail, and we make sure staff know, and we post it right at the front of the trail. And then you address it as quickly as possible. And I'm actually going to show you later in this presentation how we addressed some of the issues at Stony Brook. But things happen. A few years ago, out in Lenox, we had a microburst come through. Some of you might remember that. It went right up Lenox Mountain, and it went right through our All Persons Trail. It devastated it. It devastated our staff. It devastated our users, and it was very depressing for a short time until we realized that disaster was an opportunity, and it certainly was. It was an opportunity to look at that trail and figure out how we could improve it and make it better as we rebuilt it. So like we do when we go to put in a new trail, we looked at all of the possibilities and we saw an amazing opportunity to expand that trail to a greater section of our wildlife sanctuary so that we could show off some of the beautiful things that the Pleasant Valley Wildlife Sanctuary has to everybody. And you can see the different sections that we wanted to add to. With all the boardwalk work, this was something that was beyond our staff's expertise. So we did need to work with an outside contractor to help do that boardwalk work. And that was Peter Jensen. Many of you might know Peter and his team. They did a wonderful job. And now you can see that our All Persons Trail is an absolutely great experience, and we're in the process of redoing that overlay as well to make sure that interpretive part is part of it. Let's get back to Stony Brook. Earlier I talked about Stony Brook, which is Norfolk. We had poor drainage. We had the trail was getting widened by visitors after many years of use, and we had buildup of material along the edges, so the draining wasn't correct. So what did we do? We saw this as an opportunity, and it was an opportunity. We brought staff from throughout this, after we did an assessment, we brought our property staff from throughout the state to come for a work day. Many hands make light work, but it also allowed us a chance for them to take that knowledge back to the sanctuaries that they were working at so they could incorporate into their trail management. Early in the morning, we had about a 90-minute presentation on trails, specifically All Persons Trails and key things that should be done to maintain those trails. And then we broke our property staff into groups to do sections of trail work to address all the needs that we had along that trail. And I have a printout here, but again, they are very detailed plans. Every 50 feet or less, we made sure we knew exactly what we needed to do along those trails. If we needed to do a switchback, if we needed to do a certain way of the drainage, everything was mapped out to make sure that it was done as efficiently and as effectively as possible. We also saw it as an opportunity to try out new techniques. And this is a technique that the staff nicknamed the burrito, which is basically a geotextile cloth that is filled with material and put on top of the trail. And then we built the substrate over that textile. And the thought around this is, you saw the earlier pictures of the results of the beaver where the trail got washed out. Well, the thought is with this, if that happens, because we raised the trail, that we would have, the water would be able to actually run through the trail and not wash it out. Now, we haven't had increased beaver activity yet, but we have had a few extremely heavy rains. And to this point in time, this particular method has worked really well. It also gives us an opportunity to try out different equipment. Mass Audubon, we're dedicated to protecting the nature of Massachusetts. So whenever we can use green technology, we do. So for this project, we got electric wheelbarrows that we used, electric compactors, did as much by hand as we could, trying to not use fossil fuels for this as much as possible. Those electric wheelbarrows and compactors are not inexpensive. So if you're fundraising and you feel it is in your organization's interest to have that type of equipment, make sure you include that in your fundraising. It is, in many parts of the state, it is challenging to find electric equipment that you can rent but you can find gas-powered equipment if you so choose. But we find with the increase in green technology today that the electric options are absolutely wonderful. And Mass Audubon is building up our equipment so we can maintain all of our trails, not just our all persons trails, using the greenest technology possible. So with that, I hope that everyone has some questions for all of us. And we really thank you all for being here. As Lucy said, we do have some materials up here that we're happy to show you and you can look at and we can talk to you about. But for now, if there are any specific questions for any of us, we welcome those.
When you do your, before you open one of your new trails, do you have like a test run with some people with disabilities to do that? So that's part of the process before you open?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and Lucy, if you want to elaborate.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate a little bit. We consider that a pretty important part of this whole planning process. So after the trail is physically designed and mostly constructed, we might not have all the seating, we might not have the navigational cues, but the trail surface itself is more or less done. I bring in, before COVID, it was pretty much 7 to 10 community members with a range of abilities representing the disability community. I can tell you how I find them if that's helpful. But we would bring them in for a couple hours, feed them, tell them about the project, and then we'd go on the trail. Hopefully the weather allows that. We reschedule if we need to. But we go on the trail and follow the drafted interpretive tour from the entrance welcome stop all the way to the end. And at each stop, we share what we're planning to say there. We look at we describe what we're planning for seating. Oftentimes, there's already a nature play area or a scenic vista or an overlook or a picnic area there. Sometimes it's not there yet, but we explain what's going to be there. And then we go inside, and for about an hour, they give us feedback on everything that we encountered. I mean, sometimes they give us feedback right there and then. And it's incredibly rich feedback, and it often helps us finalize the self-guided tour and take it a lot further. Sometimes there's a little bit of navigation challenge about how to get from one stop to another, and we might have simple instructions, and some of the testers will explain we need much more clear instructions or what to expect along the way. Or sometimes they point out highlights to experience from one stop to another that we didn't think of. And so it helps us enhance the tour materials. It helps us improve it for navigability and safety, and it really helps us just make it better for a broader range of users. So we always do that right before what we call the overlays finished or the interpretive tour. It helps us finish everything, and then we invite all those testers back to the ribbon cutting, the opening. Those have become some of our best outreach ambassadors in bringing other people to the trails. So it's a really important community connection as well.
Are there any more inspections outside of your organization that have to look at that trail to say it meets the criteria?
No, it's self-evaluated. We follow, as Liz said, we follow the Forest Service standards, the trail accessibility standards. Those are for pedestrian trails. There are no national standards for wheelchair trails, for non-paved wheelchair trails. So we have made the pedestrian trail standards a little stricter. Some of our testers have helped us. For example, the Forest Service trails will let you go to a 12% slope. And one of our testers who has a spinal cord injury and uses either bilateral crutches or wheelchair, depending on the terrain, has told us not to go above 6 or 7, 8. And so we've just made those guidelines stricter for ourselves to help based on that kind of feedback.
And one more question. Do you have any sensory sites that, like for blind people, like to smell certain flowers or certain smells?
So glad you asked that. Yes, every single stop on the self-guided tour is designed to be multisensory. So they invite you to look, listen, smell, touch. That we have the tactile displays. Either they're naturally built on the trail, or we bring them onto the display post. So yes, and we have a lot of input from people from the low vision and blind community. Give us input on how to do that even better and better on each trail.
Sorry, I was gonna ask, you said that most of your all-purpose trails are connected to a visitor center, but not all of them. So is there a difference in your logistics, maintenance-wise, for trails that are right on site versus ones that are kind of standalone?
So with our standalone site, some of what we're providing on that trail can be different. So it might not be universal to the exact same features that the ones that we have at nature centers are, but we do hold the same standard as far as getting out and evaluating and making sure that those trails are being looked at and maintained at the same level of frequency. So our staff that are based out of a certain nature center, our property staff, part of their job is to go out and maintain those unstaffed sanctuaries as well. So it is the same level of oversight, regardless of if it's at a staff site or not. Oh, okay, go ahead.
What's your best, or have you come up with the best practice for your edge, like trail edge maintenance, or is it always kind of a moving target?
It's definitely a moving target, and it depends what's on the other side of that edge. Yeah, so there's different techniques that you can use depending on if you're up against a slope, if you're up against a grassy area, if you're near a wetland. So it is variable. So I can't say there's like one best practice to maintain that edge. And like I showed in the slideshow, we do experiment with different ways to do that. So it's a work in progress.
I wondered if you can share who the sign maker is, and also when you talked about in Lincoln, there's the Perkins Library, did you say? Do you just ask them to evaluate the signs, or how does that process work?
Okay, this has been a 15-year experiment, I'll just say. We have a very good collaborative partnership with the Perkins Library. They're in Watertown, and they have led us to a few sign vendors that they use on their campus that we've also used for our all-persons trails. But it's changing, and we have acquired a 3D printer, and we have a staff member who's been having a lot of fun testing and learning. We have now, we have up until now placed mostly like a brushed aluminum metal little square stop markers with raised lettering and braille. And our Perkins, our advisors from Perkins proof the braille for us before we have that sign. That's a sign vendor that they work with already, and so they already have a relationship. That vendor would send the braille proofs to the Perkins Library team. They will proof it and send it back. It doesn't always work though, because we have one site that has a stop called the Wet Meadow, and the braille said West Meadow. And they thought, oh, that sounds like a nice place, West Meadow. Looks good to us. So I've had to be a little bit more intentional about what I'm asking them to proof. But the metal is not holding up well. It's getting corroded, and it's not weathering well. The edges are coming up, and they've become kind of a safety hazard. And the price has gone up and up and up because our testers told us how much better the raised lettering is than the flat lettering. And so to get those cast, it's like hundreds of dollars for each stop marker. So the 3D printer has really become, not that we want to put more plastic out into the world, but it's actually become a much better process for us because nothing is glued on. This is holding it up. We have the raised lettering. It gets printed right in the 3D printer, and the braille. Our colleague who's been experimenting with the braille, the Perkins team, there's a lot of mutual advice going back and forth, and they're now sharing standards. So we now know how to make the braille very user friendly, and sand it with the right grade of sandpaper, so it's really nice to touch. And it's the style that they think is the best style. So we are getting there. So I think our newest trail is probably going to have more of the homemade plastic 3D printed stop markers and display labels. But the vendor that we have been working with, is in Waltham, and I'm having trouble remembering the name, but happy to help anyone through an email if you want to ping me afterwards.
And on the, when you spoke before about the items that people borrow, like the all-terrain walkers, sea canes, hands-free binoculars, those, I thought that was a great list to have if we haven't started this, but what's the best way that people borrow them? Because the trails are at different places.
Well, we only loan those things out at our staffed nature centers. We can't really loan them out unless a group or a user tells us way ahead they want to go to one of our unstaffed sites. Then we'd have the nearest visitor services or educator meet them at the site. That's a possibility. But most of the items to loan out are just located at the nature centers. And so the biggest piece of that, besides acquiring the items, because those Grit Freedom chairs are about $5,000 each. They come at a cost, but funders really enjoy paying for them. So they're very funder friendly. You know, as Liz said, the funders like to fund different aspects of this work. And there are some funders, the Christopher Dana Reeve Memorial Foundation funded 6 Freedom chairs and 11 all-terrain rollators for us last year, because that is their emphasis, is trail mobility aids. So we were able to make a great application and get a lot more of our mobility equipment. And now every all-persons trail at a nature center has one or both pieces of equipment to loan out. And we do try to post a poster in our admission area that says all the things available. And it's not just mobility equipment. It could be discovery backpacks or, you know, a beach kit or whatever we have available. So people seem to have really, our staff have embraced sharing that information, and we've done a lot of training. And so, did I answer your question? Kind of went off. Yes.
So we're, as you might imagine, we're sort of in the initial research and planning stages of actually 2 trails, right? And a couple things that I just love you to speak on. One is in some of the potential clients that we've spoken to, they talked a lot about their experience with great trails, but that you can't get from the parking to the trail, or the main barrier to being out in nature was lack of bathrooms, and that those were huge issues for them, keeping them from. So one would be speaking to that. And then the other thing that we've been learning a lot about is, you know, there's accessible trails, but there's also good information, as you spoke to. Like, we have a whole network of trails, and so we're trying to give people the information that they need to make their own decisions about whether a trail is right for them. So just if you have any experience in the information that's really been helpful for people, or brochures that you've put out so that are not necessarily all persons trails, but helping people know whether a trail is accessible for them.
I'll touch on the information, and then maybe Liz might want to talk about the accessible pathways and parking. We tend to give pretty standard trail information out on all our trails, the miles and miles of trails we have and the variety of trails. I don't spend a lot of time paying attention to those descriptions because that's not the focus of my work. So I'm not really sure I can speak on that. But it is very important when you do label something as an all-persons trail to not only do the maintenance, but the information available is extremely important, whether people get it on the website or get it from a phone call or an email inquiry. And so we definitely talk about the distance, the width, the slope, which habitats it goes through, if there are boardwalk segments, if there's navigational support or not, and the equipment available. And we always ask people to call ahead if they're coming, if they have accessibility concerns, they call ahead to get the trail conditions, because these trails are nature trails, and a heavy rain could take out a section. And so that's some of the information we make sure is available. We've also started adding the equipment that's available at each site. We're just always trying to get better at that. And a lot of the ways we get better is because a user will tell us what would have been more helpful to them, and then we add that.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. Just in terms of your question about kind of addressing barriers, I think that's where we have seen a lot of opportunity with these trails to address other things beyond just the trail, improving parking areas. And in most cases, I think the accessible trail maybe not most, but many cases is also the way that you access the nature center. You know, it's all sort of one and the same, and it goes directly from the parking to the nature center. Another thing we've done just in terms of planning process is Lucy mentioned the group of testers that we have once the trail is sort of mostly accessible. We have also shared some of those planning drawings with kind of a test group to get, you know, and sort of described what we're hoping to do and gotten feedback from accessible users, you know, as early in the process as we can. And that's been helpful in identifying some of those barriers that, you know, may not be immediately apparent to us.
Can I have one thing?
Yeah.
So Barbara, I'm really glad you asked the question the way that you did, in that when we describe all of our trails at Mass Audubon, we try to describe them in a way that lets the user know what they should think, what they're going to experience, slope, distance, terrain. But we make sure that in our publications, as well as our visitor service staff that is talking with individuals, that we don't tell anybody they should or should not go on a trail, or this trail isn't right for them. That is their decision to make. We're just telling them about what experience the trail will provide. And that's really, really important.
Trying to get away from easy, hard. Yeah.
Correct,
Let them
correct.
decide.
Yep.
Roughly what percentage of the APTs were upgrading existing trails versus ones that were designed new from scratch?
I don't know an exact percentage, but in most cases, you know, unless it's an entirely new property, we'd be trying to reuse existing trails to the extent possible, particularly because we are also interested in preserving habitat and kind of minimizing disruption to a property. So, you know, if there's appropriate grade and there's an existing trail, that I think would be our first choice, to reuse those existing trails. And sometimes, you know, it's mostly existing trail with a few little modifications to address grade. But that's our preference. Yeah. Let's get somebody in the back. Yeah.
This kind of design is similar to the few previous questions. So if you have a trail system and you're trying to work towards having there being access like an APT, do you have advice for, like, we're going to have to go to the AAB, and I was wondering if it's similar when you go before a conservation commission. If we say we're going to do navigation and have a road and weed, like, can you offer advice about going before the AAB to try to get permission to perform an upgrade on an existing trail when you know that you don't have the funding or the manpower right now to make it an APT?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've found, particularly, you know, with conservation commissions or any regulatory body that we might be going to, are generally open to having preliminary conversations, and are, you know, just as interested in supporting this work as we are. So I think often we've had very early conversations to share, you know, even when it's just kind of an idea, and say, this is what we're thinking of, and gotten input.
Do you have, like, does Mass Audubon go before the AAB often? Is there like a percentage of times you are granted variances?
We have not gone before the AAB. Yeah.
To be able to.
Yeah.
Do you have a rough ballpark or dollars per foot to build one of these and then for annual maintenance? I know it varies, but
You're not the first person who's asked that question. It really varies widely. I mean, for a while we were using like a $10 per square foot just for the gravel surface. Right, yeah. So it's really tough to say, particularly when you get into trails that are adding boardwalks or built elements. It can vary widely. You know, I'd say in general, like a $200,000 to $400,000 range. That also depends on the length of the trail and, you know, so many different variables, but that's a rough.
And then annual maintenance time?
Supposed to use the microphone. It truly is variable depending on what surface you're choosing and what are you including staff time? Are you not including staff time? Do you need to use outside contractors? What equipment you have? What type of issues you're particularly facing? So it is pretty variable. We're trying as an organization to have one central fund that we can divvy out funds throughout the state for our all persons trails and all of our trails, because we found the bigger the pot that you can pull from as you prioritize, the better. But I would be pulling a number out of thin air to give you an actual dollar amount to plunk in. I do know when we get a good deal on material, surface material, we'll often try to buy that in bulk and store it in order to save funds, and also our equipment moves around the state so that staff, regardless of where they're located, can utilize that equipment. So it's constantly moving because it does get pricey if you're trying to buy it to maintain a smaller trail system. And that's why a lot of land trusts will go to renting equipment for that. So sorry, variable would have been the easy answer.
Brewster's Wood showed a canoe and kayak put in. Is that a kayak, an accessible kayak launch?
It is not currently. It's a sort of sloped, hardened surface where somebody could pull up and access the trail. But it's
intended for access from the river, so it's far away from the parking, right?
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Follow-up question on Brewster Woods. I noticed on the map that there's two smaller trails, the Bluebird Trail and the Wood Duck Trail, which clearly look smaller than the main one. Are those trails still accessible?
Those are just typical, standard, like unsurfaced hiking trails.
And do a lot of your all-person trails have that combination, or are most of them just primarily all-person trails?
We mostly have a combination of those on our property. I think we want to provide different types of experiences for different folks, so most of our properties have both. Yeah.
I was wondering, so you're talking about like etiquette with customer service on the phone, and I'm recently learning like sometimes people use ADA and accessible interchangeably, but I know when it comes to like trails, ADA can be very specific. Do you find that you're using all-person trails rather than using the word ADA because you're a little bit more either strict or a little bit more lenient depending on the grade?
Sure. This is, there's a lot of confusion around this topic, and ADA does not legally apply to trails. It's for accessing buildings and within buildings. So we've gone back and forth about kind of what the right terminology is. We tend to say accessible trails or our all-persons trails for people who are familiar with Mass Audubon and kind of know what that works. But we try to not refer to ADA because that is kind of a source of confusion for a lot of folks. Yeah.
And there's sometimes municipalities have shied away from accessible trails because of the therapy or the ticket price, which obviously is higher, but you all have been so successful throughout the Commonwealth. Have these municipalities been coming to you all for advice of like how you've been able to do it, or have you done any outreach to municipalities?
Sure, I'll bring this with me. Yes, the three of us are contacted regularly, as are our colleagues at the different locations that have all-persons trails, by land trusts, wildlife refuge directors, managers, people who work in museum settings or botanic gardens that want to set up a trail. We are constantly asked, which is great because this is the spirit of the work, is to help other organizations. So as I mentioned earlier, after doing about 10 of these trails, we got a planning grant from the IMLS to put our knowledge together. This is available online. So whenever I get an inquiry, when one comes through an email inquiry to Mass Audubon and it gets transferred to me, the thing I first send out is a copy of this or a link to where this is found. We have a 7-minute video that's also available on our website that tells the story of the accessible trails from the point of view of the users, which is very powerful. And then I say, if you have more questions, contact me, because oftentimes their questions are already, I really can't spend a half an hour on the phone every time. And that's why we spent time writing this. I know this is a little outdated. Liz and Stephen and I have some work to do to make the next tool for the public and for collaborative organizational work and help. But that's what we've got right now. And I mean, there are times where I get an inquiry almost every week. It's a huge, wonderful awareness, and there's a lot of movement on this, and I couldn't be happier. Yeah, in the back. Oh, right.
So I think it was 6 years ago that you and I presented on this, and Mass Audubon was working up its program. I am so impressed with what you've gotten done. I am amazed. I mean, back then it was like all these concerns about what the rules would be and what could be done, what was possible, what was the cost. You were making it happen on the ground. I mean, that was our theme, just do something. You're doing it. I'm so impressed. I'm so
Thank you. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, for all of us, this isn't the only thing we do for Mass Audubon. It's integrated into the bigger picture of our work, but I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I'll tell you, it is absolutely the favorite part of the work I do. It is so positive and appreciative, and I don't know, it's just wonderful. And sharing what we've learned with other organizations is a really nice piece of this, because I hope that you'll take away what you learned today and share with others, and you know, reach out to us if we can offer more answers and ideas. We're happy to make more of these trails happen around the state.
Bravo.